and welcome to the new edition of Reclaiming My Mind. I'm your host, Jessica Vaughn, and today we have a special guest on with us. We have the candidate for House District 61, Karen Skyers. Karen, welcome to our show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jessica, for the invitation.
I'm super excited about this. To give our listeners just a little bit of background, because honestly, I wasn't going to have candidates on the show at all, simply because there are so many candidates, and I feel like they have so many opportunities to speak, and I didn't want to oversaturate the show or not be able to give every candidate a chance to talk and make it look like I'm having favorites. But recently, there was an incident that happened on Facebook, which brought up some very serious questions about the Democratic Party and about candidates in general, specifically marginalized and minority candidates. And I posted an open question on my Facebook about anybody who had any feedback and would like to have a conversation to make us better and to put this stuff out on the table, and you responded, and I really appreciate that. So I invited you on my show and got you on here as quickly as possible. So I'm going to address kind of what spurred this in a moment, but I also wanted to first give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about your background for those of us who don't know about you and kind of introduce yourself. So
thank you again, Jessica. So I'm Karen Skyers, born and raised in New York City. I've made Tampa my home for the past 15 years. I have 3 lovely children, ages 27, 21, and 16. Oh. I have 2 beautiful granddaughters. I'm an attorney by trade, so I started my career before law school as a child protection investigator. Oh. I worked in reunification where we put the children back into the home, and I was also an adoption specialist before then.
Wow.
Yes, and I had the great privilege of being the legislative assistant to State Senator Arthenia Joyner in this district that I seek to represent.
Wow. So you were involved in adoption and child protection agency first, and then that prompted you to want to go to law school? Or
correct. Law school was always on the horizon, but I had a family and children, and so it kind of took the back seat for a while. And then after I started working in child protection in children and families, that's what accelerated my interest in law school.
Wow. So you wanted to have a stronger impact and be a stronger voice for the people that you were working with already? Is that kind of what fueled your passion to go to law school?
Absolutely, because there were children, but there were also parents. So, once you get involved into the court system, everyone has a right to an attorney. And so I saw, the guardian ad litems. I saw that the parents had their own attorney, and then the state had their attorney. So just being in that area prompted me to want to be that voice for the voiceless.
And then you went to law school with 3 children.
Went to law school with 3 children. They were in elementary school, middle school, and high school at the same time. And I had an aging mother that I was also taking care of after my father passed away.
Oh my goodness! So you're no stranger to hard work and reaching for the stars, as to say.
Not at all.
So to kind of backtrack, what had happened earlier this week is there was a candidate who had felt like there were some emails sent out from our county party intentionally with a disclaimer on their one of their events. And unfortunately, from somebody working inside the party, I'm used to candidates not really understanding what the party is there to offer them, and kind of thinking that when they start running, just by running as a Democrat, the party is going to be able to offer them more support than they are able to, and help them fundraise, and so it was kind of my first instinct to try to clear it up, and then I realized that there was a bigger message there, and it wasn't this one instance. And there are candidates in general who feel like there is a bias against, specifically from what this candidate was saying, against African Americans when they choose to run, and that they haven't been treated equally by the county party. And unfortunately, the Facebook post turned into a lot of chaos and drama. And I feel like someone put their ego in front of the situation and used it as an opportunity to say some very hurtful things against my caucus and myself. But what I try to do is reach out to people on the post and dig in deeper and talk about this issue. And what I would like to know is, first of all, as a candidate, is that something that you've experienced, do you think?
I think people just take sides, no matter whether they're in the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. So even within that faction, you'll find that there are still cliques. Mm-hmm. So whether or not, one person supports you or supports your opponent,
right.
That's going to be something that always happens. Mm-hmm. And I believe that is, the cliquish part is what is holding this party behind, because we have so many qualified people. We have so many people that are interested in just the issues, mm-hmm. but then there are those that are self-interested and
right.
also don't want, that are holding the party back.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Do you feel like, or do you know other African-American candidates from the community that have faced any kind of specific racism from the party that they can pinpoint or put their finger on? Or do you think it's more that they feel like other candidates maybe get more support? Or, I mean, so you've worked for Arthenia.
Correct.
And so this isn't just your first rodeo as far as you just threw your hat in the ring and Correct. You're new to politics. You must have, working with her, run the gamut of working with different people. Because I feel like if there is an issue, we need to talk about how to make it better. So do you know anyone, or have you personally experienced what you feel like might be passive racism through the party?
I haven't myself, mm-hmm. but I know that I hear the same thing that you're hearing, mm-hmm. that there is some favoritism amongst inside the party mm-hmm. itself. And, again, that goes back to the clique.
Right.
So it's either, we're not treating each other as we're part of the same party.
Right.
So we're not only fighting, mm-hmm. we're all, as opposed to just, we're always fighting with the Republicans, but now we're right. infighting between ourselves.
Sure.
And I see that the responses that I've seen mm-hmm. are that that's why you have such a high number of people wanting to become independent, mm-hmm. because they see so much infighting within the party itself.
Right. And they feel that it's corrupt and that it's unfair.
Absolutely.
So what do you think as a party or just activist or people involved in politics that any of us can do in general to be more supportive of diverse candidates, of minority voices, of, people who feel passionate about the issues and want to help their community and don't have the knowledge of, necessarily how to run a race, that they can come and put their name in the ring and feel equally as supportive? What do you think there are some things that I can do, that the party can do to make people to feel that less?
I think we have to start with education.
Oh, I like that answer.
Because if you're educated on the process
right.
and understand who the players are mm-hmm. and what the actual process is,
right.
then that will lead you to become more interested, right? And mm-hmm. then you also have to have candidates who are filing to run for these offices, just not willy-nilly. You have to educate yourself on, okay, so this candidate wants to run for this particular office. What is their background? What is their experience? What are they bringing to the table, so that it doesn't appear like it's a step up
right.
or, just a self-interest. Mm-hmm. So you want to show that the particular person is someone who is also trustworthy.
Right.
And that comes along with, they have to have a history. I don't believe anybody comes into politics and doesn't have a reputation of some sort.
Right.
Right. And so I believe that if we start educating ourselves on mm-hmm. who the particular players are, mm-hmm. what they stand for, and building trusting relationships again within the party, mm-hmm. right? And mm-hmm. people that we can depend on, then I think that is where we should start.
I like the point about making the process very transparent, so that, and having, I think what I'm hearing is that we could make sure that it's very clear and very standard. So there is no room for, I just added this, or there is no room. But what the problem is, and what I think a lot of people don't understand about our county party, and I can't speak for other county parties, or even sometimes the state party, is that especially at the county level, it's volunteer run, and it's usually underfunded and understaffed, and nobody in the county party except for one person who did fundraising gets paid to do what they do. So we're relying on volunteers, and even if we set up a process, if there's somebody new and they don't understand what's happening, or they didn't have, as much communication, or, they're trying to jump in and offer support, I think people think that there's way more structure and that there's way more power within the party, that people are just kind of standing back and getting paid and pulling these strings. And there are some people who want to do that in the party,
right,
who have consolidated some power and abuse it. But for the most part, in our county party right now, the people who are in power are really trying to break that up. So I think education is a great answer, first of all. And is there anything else that you can think of, not even just candidates, but in general? Let's back up and talk about broadly that the Democratic Party can do to engage minorities or make minorities feel supported. And I hate using the word minority. Maybe there's a better word, because I don't even think it's the minority anymore. I think, people of color or different, gender preference or gender. I think everyone's becoming the majority.
Right.
But do you think that there are other things that can be done to show, the voters even, that we are a party that cares about what are happening to our voters, and not just at election time or to win elections, but actually because we care about the voters and we're the party of the people? Because that's what I wrestle with, and I get different answers from different people. So I'd love to hear your feedback on that.
I think the first thing I want to do, Jessica, is to thank all the volunteers that participate in the entire process,
right,
whether it be volunteering on a campaign at the party level. They are so important to what goes on in our daily lives. But going back to your question, I think that if people are made to understand that politics affects our daily lives, from the water bill to what time the children go to school. Politics is local.
Right.
And I think what's happened is, because of television and because of social media, everything is, so many people are focused on at the national level, right?
Yeah.
And so we're worried about what the president is doing when we need to be worried about our local officials, our state officials, and understanding what they do and how they impact our daily lives.
Right. I completely agree. So, I think we're right on track. I think it needs to be education at every level, that the more people are educated about how everything is connected and how things impact them. And I also think that educating people empowers them, and that, unfortunately, what I see in the Democratic Party is a lot of fear-mongering or party loyalty, as opposed to the education and empowerment of people. So I definitely agree with that. Why don't you, if you don't mind, tell me a little bit about what made you want to jump in this race, and how your background lines up with this district, or, what compelled you, what motivated you to get involved here?
Well, I'll tell you, there were so many things. I've been in Tallahassee for the past 7.5 years, the last 7 sessions, and I haven't seen a lot of positive come out of Tallahassee on a lot of the hot topics. Right. So we're looking at criminal justice reform. We're looking at guns in school. We're looking at, there's no ban on assault weapons, and the lack of funding for public education, and that we're not paying our teachers. I can't specifically remember the number, but we're so low nationally on compensating teachers for what they're worth, and they're leaving the state of Florida. And then our transportation, the infrastructure is terrible, right? And so I like to say that all of these pieces are connected. They're the same piece of one puzzle. So if we don't pay attention to one piece, then every other piece is falling apart. Right. Sure. And so I think that part of my motivation was seeing what can happen in Tallahassee, but also I feel like I'm put in a position where I can be an advocate. I'm an advocate because I have this experience in Tallahassee.
Right.
I have the experience in drafting bills, researching. I have the relationships. So I understand the process, the politics, and I know the people.
Right.
Right. And so what motivated me was we have one tragedy and, there's a bill passed. But there's tragedies here in this district every day,
Ooh,
right?
yeah.
We have gun violence here every day.
Right.
And if we don't address those issues and we only wait until, there's a huge national scare or there's one major incident, I think we need to start addressing these issues immediately.
Right.
As opposed to waiting. And so I think that is what motivated me because I want to be the voice for the voiceless. I don't have, I'm equipped with being able to make Tallahassee work for us and for this district and for the people of Florida.
Sure. So tell me a little bit about your district, because we were talking about it when you first got here. And to me, it looks like an interesting gerrymandered district from where it runs. And I noticed, like, I'm in New Tampa. I'm almost on the border of it. If I had gone a little bit further south, USF it encompass. Tell me a little bit about this district and the constituents in it.
The district is so diverse. First off, it is 56% African American,
Okay.
and then I believe it's about 30% white, and then we have about, if my numbers are right, 19% Hispanic.
Okay.
Those numbers changed. They just went up because of the influx of Puerto Ricans that came over after the hurricane. And so we're still counting those and to see, who's registered to vote.
Does USF, like the influx of the students, affect that district as well?
Well, I don't know specifically how many students had transferred into USF.
Okay.
So I can't give you that specifically.
Right.
But we have seen the neighborhoods changing.
Okay.
Right. From 2 years ago even, or 4 years ago.
Okay.
But it is a diverse district with with different issues.
Sure.
And I like to consider myself a diverse candidate that is able to represent not just one part of the district, but the district in its entirety.
So what have you heard on the campaign trail are the issues from a lot of the constituents when you're out there knocking on doors and you're touching voters? What kind of feedback are you getting about the people in that district and what their concerns are on an everyday local level?
Every day, I'm knocking on doors. My team is knocking on doors, and we hear a lot of the same things, which is criminal justice reform, talking about Amendment 4, the restoration of felons' rights, because I'm running into a lot of people who can't vote yet, but are very much so interested in joining a campaign or getting to know the issues.
Awesome.
And so what I've done is give them an opportunity to work on my campaign so that when those rights are restored, they're able to start building a resume.
Awesome.
Right? Because you can't vote, but you have to invest some time. And this is investing in your time in my campaign is investing in yourself.
Yeah, it's education,
right?
how the system works.
Absolutely. And then there are other issues. So there's the expansion of Medicaid for our seniors. I've run into some veterans, and some homelessness issues. So we get back into the affordable housing.
Right.
And, the children that are being affected with the opioid crisis and our foster care issue is a huge problem here in this district.
Really?
So yes, because there's still children that are not being placed, or we don't have enough foster parents to house them.
Right.
So that's a huge issue.
Wow.
And education is huge also. I've met so many teachers who are, desperately, seeking other positions because they have to work 2 jobs, and they love to teach, but they just can't afford it.
Sure. Every teacher I know is working more than one job.
And that's unfair and unfortunate.
It is. And as a teacher myself, I'm subbing since my son was young, but I'm still in the classroom, and I spend a lot of time in the teacher's lounge listening to what teachers say. And more so than the pay, it's just the demoralization, as well as ridiculous standards that are put on, the amount of work that they're supposed to do. The standards are changing all the time. There's more work added. And it just feels like overall that it's been designed to get teachers to quit so that they can be replaced with, more or less educated workers who are right out of high school, who don't have the experience, and who, quite honestly, charter schools can pay $8 to $10 an hour and save a lot of money. So it feels like more than just the pay, it's the whole design to push qualified teachers out to replace them with people that they can pay lower wages and just profit off the education system.
And that's really right. And that's the attack on the public school education system in its entirety because of the teaching to test.
Right.
Yeah. So those are critical issues.
So tell me a little bit more, because we had talked about how you had worked with Arthenia, and that she had inspired you, and you had learned some lessons from her. Tell me a little bit about that experience and some things that you learned with her that you hope to take into this race, and once you're elected, take into the seat that it's being vacated by Sean Shaw.
Correct.
Because he's running for Attorney General.
Correct.
And was that his first term in the seat?
Yes.
Okay. So it's his first term in the seat, and now he's running for Attorney General. So yeah, tell me some things that you learned from working with her.
Well, first I have to say it is an absolute honor to have served under Senator Joyner.
Right.
I learned so much professionally and personally.
Mm-hmm.
And so professionally, well, both professionally and personally, she's taught me to, number one, be a woman of your word,
mm-hmm.
right? Because your word is your bond.
Right.
So don't go back on it. And I know that because when she made a decision on a particular bill,
mm-hmm.
Or a particular piece of legislation that was filed, and a lobbyist came over, or, whatever her decision was, mm-hmm. she never went back and forth. She never vacillated. So that was very important because that was how people earned started trusting her in this process, because you're able to say, hey, well, at least I know that she's not going to go back and change her mind on me.
Yeah.
Right. Once you make up your mind, it is. And if you don't know something, it's okay to say you don't know, because the other part of it is I like to make an informed decision. Mm-hmm. Right. And that is something that our training guides us to make informed decisions. Mm-hmm. So if there's one side of the issue that I haven't heard from, or, some stakeholders that I still need to contact in order to make an informed decision, give them the opportunity, to listen to both sides. Sure. And I also learned to, read everything. She read all of her bills. And I think that I'm going into that seat with the same vigor, with the same strength, and it's an honorable seat, it's an honorable position, and people have to trust you, because you are their advocate, right? You are I'm taking the people's voice to Tallahassee so that their voice can be heard.
Right.
So those are the things that I learned from her, and just to be yourself. And sometimes you have to make a decision, and sometimes that decision requires you to stand alone.
Right.
Whether that be the case, then you stand alone. And so I certainly learned valuable lessons from her.
I'm learning that lesson right now. We were talking about it before, and for those of the people who aren't familiar with Senator Joyner, I had seen her speak, and I mentioned this to you, I think at a Ruthless convention, and she overwhelmed me. Just her passion, the way that she spoke, the issues that she spoke to. She highlighted a long career of fighting adversity at every step and being, at that point, absolutely the strongest minority voice that she could, and really championing a whole community of people and fighting for so many different people, and had so many different relationships with people that I admire so much that, even though I didn't know much about her, I walked away just being impacted by hearing a 5-minute speech with her so much that she instantly became a shiro of mine. But back to some of the issues. So we're talking about, and I touched on this a little bit with our last guest, and I see this at the forefront now as issues kind of move around, but affordable housing, you talked about it a little bit. I feel like that's an issue that just in general we're facing as a county, but also in the district that you represent a lot, in East Tampa, in USF specifically, and how your district is cut. So at the state level, because, I mean, that's kind of the issue too, is sometimes we're passionate about a lot of different issues, but if we're running for a certain seat, we might not always be able to affect every issue that we feel passionate about. At the state level where you're running, how do you feel like you'd be able to affect the affordable housing crisis that we would have locally?
Well, the first thing that I would do is refile Representative Shaw's bill on affordable housing to stop raiding the Sadowski Trust Fund, because it's there for a specific purpose, but it's being raided for other things. So I would certainly file that bill. And, I believe it only received one hearing, but I will work with those parties that are up there. And I remember him having great support from, the cities. Love that bill.
So tell me a little bit about the fund and more about that bill, because honestly, I'm not that familiar with it.
So it's the Sadowski Fund was for affordable housing, right? And so it's been rated, and that money has been pulled out for other uses. And so what it does is it takes away from the affordable housing, which creates the crisis.
Is it like they supplement it, like Section 8, it supplements funds? Not really sure. That's okay. So you would work on a bill that would help make sure that we have the funding for affordable housing.
Correct.
What do you think about gentrification? As far as, we want to take our city and our cities and we want to rebuild areas that have been blighted and put money into that. But how do we do that without just forcing all of the people who can't afford those areas out of those areas and giving them no opportunity to prosper from the gentrification?
You're right. I think I'm okay with gentrification. My concern is the displacement of the other people who live there, and the whole eminent domain thing. So,
which means that basically the government
comes to take.
They can take any land that they want to if they're going to develop in that area, whether or not people want to give up that land.
Exactly, and so my concern is that you are pushing people out where.
Right,
because these are their homes. These are family homes where people have lived and raised their children, and maybe now they're older and can't afford, because they're on a fixed income, to go anywhere else. So yes, I understand that we want to move the city forward and attract younger folks to live here or to stay here. But at the same time, I don't want it to be at the cost of the people who've invested and lived in these communities and love these communities and their homes.
Right. Right. So I wonder if there's some way to preserve, almost like in New York, where that's where you came from, right?
Right.
There were some rent-controlled areas, or how do you think that they manage? I mean, obviously they didn't manage it long-term, because Manhattan seems completely gentrified, and now it's happening to Brooklyn.
Correct.
But were there anything from living in that city that you saw is something that we might be able to implement here? Is there any way to partition some of the area and make it rent-controlled, or protect people who have lived in these communities for a long time where they are looking to gentrify?
I'd love to see that here. I'd love to see that here. Because that is, one of my concerns with gentrification. It's like, of course we want, everybody wants something new and shiny and pretty, to be able to stay here and live and build their lives here. But at the same time, I don't want it to be at the cost of the people who have lived here and their families are here. Everybody lives in, I used to live around the corner when I was married with children. I lived around the corner from my parents. Oh. And that was because, it was convenient.
Sure. You need that support.
It was convenient. But, we don't want to create another situation where nothing is affordable, right? And I'm starting to see that, and it worries me a little bit, because that's what I'm hearing from the citizens of this wonderful district.
Yeah. I mean, I worry about it in our county in general. I have an older mother, and I think I might have mentioned this on the other podcast, and she's thinking of moving up here, and just trying to find something that's affordable is almost impossible. And I think that there are so many people that are running that, are running on gentrifying our areas, and that they're not talking about this. And it's got to be at the forefront of, I think, of most people's campaigns, because I hear about it. Some other things I've heard you talk about are transportation. Does that mean that, like, on a state level, you support building an infrastructure of transportation? What does that look like to you when we talk about transportation in the district and the seat and what you'd be able to do where you're running for?
There's a few issues happening here, and this is what I've talked to. So there's one particular issue in it's outside of my district, but I see how the Hart bus line has affected. Some people have to walk almost a mile to the bus stop, and then I have some senior citizens that have contacted me to say, "Hey, listen, I can't get to the doctor because they've moved my bus stop, or the bus is not running at this particular time again," and so. We have to, we want to make Tampa a world-class city, right? So we have to invest in the infrastructure.
Absolutely.
I was working for Senator Joyner when she filed the lawsuit in 2011 against Governor Scott for the high-speed rail. And now we see...
I was protesting on the streets for that.
Right. And now we see, what is it, 7 years later, where we could have already... We could compare Tampa to other cities that did take that money, right? And now we're behind 7 years.
Yeah.
And so...
And it was just almost like a egotistical thing, right? Rick Scott didn't want to take the public funding because he wanted to prove that he was anti anything Obama had to offer, an agenda. And now he's offering the exact same plan, but he wants us to pay for it out of our already dwindling funds that we can't pay for education. We're rating affordable housing plans, and we're taking all the money out of any kind of infrastructure. And now he wants to pay private developer friends of his to do the exact same thing that we could have had federal funds from. So,
and now we go back to why voting is important.
It all circles back. It all circles back. So this did answer some of the questions, so I took some questionnaires from listeners.
Okay.
And right on topic with what we're talking about, and I think it's kind of an unfair question, so I don't know if you're going to be able to answer it. But one person did say, what do you think is more pressing for communities of color, or, the district that you're working in? Do you think it's more affordable housing or transportation? Do you think that there's a priority?
I'm going to say this because this is what I've been running on. All of the issues that we have are part of one puzzle. So if we don't address one, every other one fails or falters.
I agree.
Right? And so we can't keep looking at everything separately.
I agree.
Right? If I can't get to work because I don't have transportation, then I can't afford my affordable housing, right? It can't. But if I don't make a livable wage, I can't afford a car, or I can't afford to travel to work. And then I become desperate, and I fall into the criminal justice system, or I
get caught in a payday loan,
and I don't have any education, so I can't make a certain amount of money. So all of these are just a part of one big puzzle, and that's why we have to start looking at these as one big puzzle.
You're speaking out of the progressive playbook right now. Okay, let's get back to some of the questions that I had here. So I'm just going to read one verbatim. It says, so I would like to hear Ms. Skyer's thoughts on what non-Black candidates need to champion to motivate other Black voters to be interested in their campaign and come out to work for their victory and or vote. I don't even remember who that came from. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, so for non-Black candidates, I think it's the same answer that I would give any candidate.
Yes.
Right? Educate the person or the people who you want to volunteer for you, right? Come to the neighborhood, and not only when you're campaigning, right? Make yourself available for questions, for answers, for tough questions, right? And become a part of the community so that you can understand the community.
Right.
And I feel like if we help people to understand, hey, listen, all politics are local, right? You want to know why your street lights are not on? That's local. You want to know why your water bill is that? That's local.
Right.
You want to know why the bus comes at 5 a.m. to pick up the kids for school? That's local.
That's
so you have to just educate people. I think for me, it's all about education and
Right.
communication.
Ooh.
And I think once you start those dialogues,
Yes.
people will become interested. And because what I'm finding right now, Jessica, is so many people have lost hope
Yes.
in this system. And it's not only people of color.
Right.
It's a lot of people. You know, I had a young lady say to me that she was switching parties because she was just over the Democrats.
Right.
And other people were saying, you know, we're tired of voting, or nothing is going to change. My vote doesn't count.
Right.
And so what I did was I introduced them to me and to my platform and to how I'm running so that I can inspire them to believe in someone and something again.
Right.
And that's what's been happening.
I agree. Yeah. I feel like people don't understand. It all comes down to education, and people don't understand. And I think this comes back to what we can do in the party is people don't understand what our party stands for a lot of the time anymore.
Right.
Because we have so many candidates who are worried about being in a conservative district or, you know, not winning election every time, that they water down or they lean to the center and they don't stand on the issues, or they sell out their votes and they don't stand on the issues that impact people, and people see that and they start to lose trust in our candidates.
Right.
And I hear you saying words that I agree with so much that I think are important as far as re-engaging people to know what we as a party and what our candidates stand for. And it should be for giving people a voice, being reflective of their needs and their issues, being available, making connections on a large scale, level that will actually impact their lives, educating them. And I feel like there's so much pushback from that within the party and people inside the party who have consolidated this power, and they've become disconnected from the voters, and they don't understand. They think, we can ride by on, party loyalty, and that we're the obvious better choice, and that the administration is doing so much harm. Voters will automatically vote for our candidates in this big blue wave. And I don't think they understand how disillusioned the voters really are, and that they aren't loyal to the Democratic Party, and they don't see us as necessarily being that much better when our elected officials aren't standing up for our issues and digging in their heels and fighting back for us when we are under attack.
Right. Because what's been happening, it's the divisiveness has pushed people away from their civic duty, right? And engagement.
Right.
And that's because they've lost hope. They've lost trust in the very system that people fought and died for.
Sure.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so we have to make sure that we're out voting, but not only just voting, we have to educate the voters on the particular issues.
Right.
Not just, hey, go, not to vote blindly.
Absolutely.
Right. And to teach people, so you know how so-and-so voted on this particular bill? That's public information.
Right.
Somebody called me a millionaire. And I said, my financial report is public record. But you find that, right? And so I'm challenging people to stop listening to rumors or gossip and to get to know the candidate who wants to represent them personally and watch them and follow them. And so I've been trying to hold myself out to be very transparent for that reason, because it hurts my heart when I hear someone say that they don't want to vote.
Yeah.
It's horrifying to me.
Sure.
Because that's one thing that we do have.
Right.
Unless you're a felon and you're waiting for Amendment 4 to pass. Right. Because we have 1.5 million people who are disenfranchised right now. So think about that voting power.
Yeah.
Think about all the people who want to vote but can't vote.
Yeah.
So once we encourage people and educate people on the particular issues and how it affects their daily lives, I think you will find that people are going to be much more interested.
So would you say that a good strategy for the Democratic Party to be more supportive of communities of color or minority, air quotes, communities or marginalized communities, and it's not just ones of color, it talks about socioeconomic ranges. There are communities that have been marginalized against because of their sexual preferences or their identities, is to go into these communities in general, educate people, have tough conversations, listen to the issues that these communities are saying are at the forefront of what their needs are, and that they need someone to represent them and really immerse themselves in all of these communities to be better advocates and so that these communities would feel more supported.
I agree. I think that you hit the nail. You hit it, because I see this happening, right? When you educate someone on a particular issue or give them a piece of information that they didn't have before,
right,
those people start feeling empowered. Hey, I didn't know that.
Right.
But now that you know that, like they say, knowledge is power.
Right.
And so if we start educating people on the rights that they have, make them vote, hold people accountable, right? Because this is a responsibility that you don't only have for yourself, but you have it for the rest of us, right? If we're looking at a community, right, it's our duty to be civically engaged.
Right.
If my street light is out and I have a husband, right? I feel safe at home, but you're my neighbor and the street light is out and I know you live by yourself. It's my duty to call and make sure that, the public lighting is handled for not only for my safety, but also for yours, and you're my neighbor. And I think once we get back into that mindset of we are all neighbors, we are all part of this one community, then I believe that we will start seeing changes.
So reconnecting, reminding each other that we're all interconnected. Here's my question. I try to educate everybody, and I find that sometimes people have a preconceived notion, and that even if they're confronted with facts that are meant to educate, they're shut down to that information, or they are closed off to the way that you want to present it, whether it's due to personal trauma or whether it's a lack of trust, that it's not always as easy just to offer education and people are lining up and open and receptive to it. So do you have any suggestions or ideas for reaching communities that aren't necessarily open to that education, or people or voters or candidates because they feel that they've been dismissed for so long, or they feel that they don't feel empowered, or they don't feel important, and so they're not necessarily receptive to that education or information?
And I think that they're not receptive because what people have seen in the past is that people just come out of their shell when it's time to run for office again, if they've run in the past.
Sure.
Or, I'm a new candidate. So when people see me, some say, we haven't seen you before. And I say, well, I had a private life, right? And so now it's a public life, for one.
Sure.
And which is fine. Once you explain that to people, they understand.
That's a good way to say it.
It is, and it's true. It's, I would have loved to, see you or see me at another time, but I had a private life. So, what I did privately was just, hey, I went to work, took care of the kids. It wasn't at this level, that I've stepped it up to. But I think if we start, I don't know, Jessica, if we either tie it to something else, or we have to get back on, everybody's not on social media.
Sure.
Right? So how do we connect to the people who are not on social media? Because we know how to connect to those who are. Right? But those people who are not on social media, how do we reach them? How do we engage them? Do we, invite them to some kind of forum? Do we invite them, after parent-teacher conference and say, hey, stay for an hour. We're going to talk about this today. Or, we're going to remind people, here's, it's election season, and the mayoral race is coming in 2019, and we're introducing you to all these people. And to be fair, it can be, it can come from both parties.
Sure.
I'm not saying that it just has to be Democrats.
Because
my district is not solely Democrat.
Sure.
So when I get elected, I'm going to represent other people, right? I'm going to have independents and I'm going to have Republicans there. And so I think that if you get into office and you recognize that everyone, you represent everyone in that district for whatever their needs are. And however you get that information out to them, it's going to be different because they're different audiences, right? So you have young young parents. You're not going to treat them like you treat, someone with a PhD. I have friends who have PhDs. I have lawyer friends who are not involved in the political process.
Right.
One, because they either don't want to be, they don't find it interesting, or they're just over it, like a lot of people.
Right. Sure. So this is my question. Because I've been trying to have this conversation for a while in general about like specifically going into, let's say, communities of color. And my conversation towards it first started happening. I was a Bernie delegate at the DNC, and there was a group of delegates called Blackman for Bernie. And I was lucky enough to have some time to really discuss issues with them and why maybe a lot of African Americans didn't understand like Bernie's messages that were aimed at racial justice or aimed at, some of the policies that have been set in place to hurt community of colors, and why that didn't resonate within, the African American community. And their feedback was, whether it was right or wrong, is that it's really hard for white people to go into communities and spread this message that, in their opinion, and why they started like Black Men for Bernie was because they had more success bringing his policies and his message and the message that, he cares about these communities, he's going to stand up, that they felt people were more receptive from it coming from people within their community, and that, having, a white, middle class canvasser show up on their doorstep to tell them about a white candidate who really cared about their communities, something was lost in translation. And I think that we look at like the structure of the Democratic Party and how it comes down to grassroots structure and precinct committee people. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of precinct committee people in minority areas or impoverished areas, because I feel like, and whether this is right or wrong, people are too busy trying to survive. They don't have the luxury of volunteering, to work for a party or canvassing that, their day-to-day struggles are so encompassing. They don't have the luxury that we have to be able to do this.
Absolutely.
But I think that there's also a hesitation from people who outside of those communities then to go into those communities and try to, almost be viewed as pushing like a candidate or pushing politics that it's going to be not well received. And I don't know if that's what's holding part of the Democratic Party back, is because we don't have enough voices from within those communities to feel like we can go into those communities without it look like pandering or just trying to get. And so I think that that's a disconnect. I think that a lot of white people who are volunteering and working for the party are at a loss at whether it's better to go in those communities and build those relationships and be damned if it looks like we're pandering because it doesn't matter and we need to reach those voters, or if we should be trying to find people from within those communities and help people within those communities organize better. And, I think that's kind of where the loss is. Are we good ambassadors to reach those communities? And what kind of feedback do you have on that?
I think both issues or both points that you made are valid. Mm-hmm. So for me, I think it's okay if a white person goes into a minority neighborhood, because it's not always about, somebody can be a person of color and give his message, sure, and not necessarily be a truthful message, right?
Right.
So just like, if just because you look like me doesn't mean you're for me,
right?
Right. So it's not that we can't learn, but I think what happens is the lack of trust. Right. So sometimes you may have to work with someone within the party or within the community that has already established trust for you to come in and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this, or hey, this is how we want you to get engaged, right? Because it's unfair, even with the Hispanic population. Right. If you don't speak my language, it's going to be hard for me to trust you,
sure,
right? It's a matter of earning trust. And so I believe, if you speak my language, that's easier for me to trust you.
Right.
I may not look like you, but I speak Spanish. So you understand that I know in some of your customs and I can appreciate and respect, your culture.
Right.
So I think that, it's still a very touchy-feely subject.
Right.
Some people are not happy when a color, a person, no color comes to, somebody white comes to a minority area and says, hey, vote for Bernie or vote for Hillary. And we haven't seen or heard from you, the entire campaign.
Yeah.
Right. It's like a slap in the face. You just want my vote.
Right.
So this is why you're just coming to talk to me, as opposed to, you send somebody from Washington, D.C. that knows nothing about what's going on in Tampa and Tampa politics and has no relationships established. How can we trust you?
Right.
Right. And if we can't trust you, we don't want to vote for you.
So I think what I'm hearing, and I've talked to Susan Smith about this, is, and what the Progressive Caucus wanted to do and still wants to do, is instead of coming in to talk about specific candidates, being more reflective and coming into those communities to ask those communities what issues are important to you, to listen to different communities, to be reflective, and to build those relationships because they're important and not because you want to earn their vote or there's any one candidate running or for any personal reason other than we are supposed to be a party that reflects everybody's voice. And if we're not talking to every member of the party and we're not being reflective, we can't claim to do that. So I think being reflective, building those relationships, asking people what's important to them instead of just giving them information is all important to this narrative. Pay attention, Democratic Party. But I also think that building these relationships, being reflective is important. Susan Smith feels like instead of just going into any community where we want to empower the community or engage them more and having dialogue, that we need to offer trainings on how those communities can self-organize and empower them and teach them whatever we've learned in, our organizing circles or political circles that's empowered us to keep moving forward and doing this thankless, hard, soul-crushing work that we do is, giving other communities the same access to knowledge and the same skills that we have to help them feel empowered as opposing to be like the champions or the saviors of those communities. What do you think about kind of that logic?
I think Ms. Smith has a point. She hit the nail right upside the head. You teach a man to fish, right? Makes the person feel empowered, right? Because now I understand the issue, I know the process, and now no one else can come in and take that from me. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that piece of knowledge and I'm going to share it within my community. And then that's how you start building your base again, right? Because one person, a few people go in there, they're trained, you get them to organize, galvanize everyone, empower the people, and once people feel empowered, like they have a choice or that they can make a difference, you will see something progress, right? You won't see what we are seeing now, which are people who are just stuck in, certain places with certain mindsets and think that, there's an entitlement to a seat or, it's my turn. This is not about popularity, right? This is about hard issues. This is about moving forward and not, self-interest, which is what's happening within this party that people are complaining about, right? And so while I'm knocking on doors and getting to know people and introduce myself, people have lost hope and trust in this system. Now, a lot of that comes from Washington, D.C. and watching television, but I know that what you do and what I do is making a difference and people are watching.
Oh, well, that's encouraging. I feel empowered just by that statement. So I guess in closing, if you have any feedback or if you have anything that you want to share about your race or your constituents or anything that you'd like people to know about you in this race in general that either sets you aside from, maybe people that you're running against or that would make your constituents have a great grasp of your platform and what you're running on, I'd love for you to share that with us.
Absolutely. So my website is www.karenskyers.com. It's KarenSkyers.com. I'm the only one in this race that has any Tallahassee experience, that has any knowledge of the entire process the people and the politics in Tallahassee. I'm also the only bilingual candidate that has a diverse background.
Oh, okay.
I went from being an educator to working for children and families. And I've also worked for the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights. And I was a public defender. So I did a lot of my work right here in this community. And we don't have time for someone to get to Tallahassee and have to be taught this entire process. What will happen is we will be way behind. I'm ready to start work on day one. And so I hope and expect and pray that people believe in me. They believe in my platform on creating jobs, getting Medicare, Medicaid expanded, fighting for our teachers, fighting for our men and women in blue, making sure that, that they're safe, but also keeping our children safe, and fighting against the gun lobby who, and the rest of the people who voted not to ban assault weapons. So I think what you want and need in Tallahassee is a fighter and someone who has proven herself. And I've done that. And I've had relationships and worked in Tallahassee for the last 4 people who's held this seat. So I'm very involved in this process and I'm very knowledgeable. So I hope people get out to vote, early voting from August 13th through the 26th.
Education.
Yeah, education. And, they can contact me via my website and my phone number is on the palm cards as well.
What would you like help with? If people wanted to volunteer, what are you looking for right now?
Well, if people want to volunteer, they can send an email to Karen FOR, Florida spelled out, at gmail.com. And we're looking for volunteers to knock on doors with me and to do some phone banking.
Okay. So I just want to cover, actually, I had something on my list. I hate to close and come back, but I often do that. I know you mentioned supporting men and women in blue. So I don't want that to take away from anything that you might feel passionately about, because I know you've mentioned it and we haven't really covered it as far as criminal justice reform. So I know that it seems like right now that's only one side to be on, right? That you can't necessarily talk about our police force in a positive light. And then also it's hard to then also talk about, what's happening to people of color being murdered in the streets and the racism and the fear that's rampant in our police force, where, just lives are constantly on the line because of bad training and no community policing and all of the issues within our justice system from the top to the bottom, from the school to prison pipeline. Tell me a little bit more about your understanding of those issues.
Okay, so here's what I believe needs to happen. We have to open up the lines of communication between law enforcement and the communities, right? The communities of color have been greatly impacted by some bad apples on the police force, right? I'd like to see a time where when I was growing up, you call the police because you're in trouble. You call the police because you're scared. Right? You don't call the police on the police but that's what's happening because their record, right? A lot has been tarnished by what we have been seeing. And a lot of people have lost respect for that uniform, right? And it's because you have, again, some bad apples, some bad actors. But, at the same token, you have to understand what these men and women do on a daily basis, right? Their job is to protect us. So if we don't feel protected, then there's an issue and we have to address those issues. Yes, we need training. We need cultural sensitivity training. We need training with how to deal with people with mental health issues. We need training on how to deal with juveniles. We need training on how to deal with women who are pregnant or just women. There has to be training, right? And there also has to be work on the part of the community because we have to start, I'm in a precarious position. My son, I have a black son who's 16 years old, but his father is a police officer. So he is in a position to where he's like, well, my dad is a cop, but I'm not supposed to trust cops. Right? Because they're killing my friends.
Right.
And so I engage in dialogue with my son and his friends. And I think that it's the responsibility of not only parents, but teachers in the community that we can start rebuilding trust with the police officers, right?
Would you support bills, let's say, if anybody brought them up or initiate any bills that would address the issues such as community review boards or talk about training academies for police officers and how they're being trained and what the policies are as far as when they can use the guns? And also, how do we address the fact that they're in the criminal justice system when police officers blatantly murder people on the streets, they're not held accountable? I think that's part of where the trust issue is that we talk about bad apples or these one police officers, and maybe it's because, they're not in these communities and they're generally afraid and they're improperly trained and they're not supported. But then on a level when they act inappropriately, they're not held accountable. And so there's nothing that gives them pause to make changes, because the police officers are then just exonerated and they get off and people feel distrust, and it doesn't seem like there's anything that's addressing the issues. So what kind of bills or things would you get behind to address those issues?
Certainly will lend my support to bills where there is some sort of community policing or, certain trainings. And I know that some police officers have, their training handbook, but I'd like to see, specifically what those are and what they say. And, is every police department trained to shoot to kill? Because that is what is understood in my neighborhood and the neighborhoods that I seek to represent, right? There's a lot of distrust right now with the police. You have to be able to trust them. But at the same token, they also have to be able to trust us because they also are part of our community. So we need to start painting a picture again of we have these good officers trained properly to come into our communities and understand how to diffuse certain situations without killing anyone, right? Because at this stage, people are afraid to even call the police if they have an issue because they don't know if they're going to end up dead.
Not white people. They're not afraid to call the police if somebody's barbecuing or selling water in front of something.
Of course. No, right. No, you have a point. You know, people are afraid to call the police because those same police that are supposed to be protecting them are the same ones that are killing us.
Right.
And so I understand that people are afraid. I'm afraid for my children.
Sure.
I'm afraid for myself. I usually I carry my bar card and my driver's license in the cup holder.
Right.
In case I ever got pulled over.
I can't imagine.
Right? Because I got pulled over before. I had a suit on, but my curly hair was sort of in an afro.
Right.
Right? And so I'm like, why is this guy stopping me? Right? And he's yelling already, get out of the car, get out of the car.
Right.
And I'm like, for what?
Right. You're not even,
I don't
you don't even know why you're stopped.
I don't even, right. And so we have to be careful because, at that same time is, we talk about compliance with the police, but, sometimes you end up being dead because you're compliant.
Right.
Right.
All right. Well, I feel like this conversation has been super productive. Of course, we're running up against time constraints like I always do. I would love to have you come back on. I'm also open to having other candidates, anybody who feels like we can talk about specifically the issues that we're talking about. I encourage to come on. I have an open invite to anybody who wants to come on and talk about these issues. I really appreciate you being the first person to respond. I've put this call out before and it seems sometimes like it falls on deaf ears, and I've been trying to have these conversations for a long time. So thank you so much for taking time out of which is, I'm sure, a crazy candidate schedule. For those of you who don't know, being a candidate is totally insane. And every minute leading up to the election is filled with trying to get your message out. So again, I appreciate it. And if you have anything else you want to add,
well, I just want to say thank you for the platform, for the opportunity. I know these are tough conversations,
right?
But Jessica, if you and I didn't have this conversation, we wouldn't get anywhere.
Absolutely.
Right. So I appreciate the time. I appreciate the platform and your support and having this tough conversation with me. We're right. We're 50 days away from Election Day. And so hard at work. So I'm going to get back on the trail.
Well, you definitely have my support for coming on here and talking. And thank you to all the listeners. Thank you who submit questions. Thank you who support our show and encourage us to keep exploring these issues. If you have any feedback, as always, you can reach me at jvaughn, VAUGHN 30 @gmail.com. And as always, have a great evening.